I wasn't the jealous type. At least that's what I told myself. But then one night, I found out the truth. And it changed everything. It wasn't one obvious sign that tipped me off, but rather a series of small nagging details that piled up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. First, it was his phone. He used to leave it anywhere. Unlocked, wide open, not anymore. Now? It never left his side. Always in his pocket. Always face down. Always on silent. At first, I thought maybe it was just habit. Maybe he was being more cautious, but then came the late nights. He had never been much of a night owl, always the first one to fall asleep beside me. But now, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed cold and empty. I walk into the living room, and there he'd be, hunched over his phone, the screen casting an eerie glow on his face. When he noticed me, he'd lock it instantly, flashing me a sheepish smile. "Just checking emails," he'd say. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the gut feeling, the one that twisted in my stomach every time he pulled away from me, wouldn't go away. Then last night, he made a mistake. He was exhausted, barely keeping his eyes open. His grip on the phone loosened, and for the first time in months, it wasn't locked. It wasn't face down. It wasn't hidden. I stared at it, my heart pounding. This was my moment. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, my breath hitching as I tapped the screen. Notifications flooded in, and my stomach clenched at the sight of them. There it was. Dozens of messages. The kind that no married man should be sending. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just mindless flirting. This was something deeper, something intimate, something that had been going on for a long time. And whoever it was, they weren't just some random fling. Because my husband wasn't just hiding a secret. He was hiding someone. I sat there, frozen, gripping his phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The words on the screen didn't change, but I kept rereading them, my brain refusing to process what was right in front of me. My heart pounded in my ears, my stomach twisted in knots, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I was about to throw up. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just flirting. It was deeper, intimate, real. And the worst part? It wasn't with a woman. I blinked hard, trying to force my brain to make sense of it. Maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe it was a joke, some inside reference I wasn't privy to. But as I scrolled through the endless stream of text, the truth became undeniable. I hate sneaking around like this. I wish things were different. I don't know how much longer I can pretend. Pretend. That word hit me harder than any betrayal ever could. I scrolled back, scanning the way he spoke, the way he poured his emotions into every message, something he hadn't done with me in a long, long time. The late-night texts, the confessions, the comfort between them. It wasn't just an affair. It was something deeper. This wasn't a mistake. This was love. A love that had existed before me, that had endured through me, that had been hidden behind my back while I played the oblivious wife. My whole body went numb. My mind raced through the past, through every little moment that suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. The lack of passion, the hesitation when I reached for him, the way he stiffened under my touch instead of melting into it, the excuses, the distance, the way he always seemed just slightly detached, like he was living in a different reality, one that I was never meant to be a part of. And then, the ugliest realizations of all clawed its way into my mind. He hadn't just been lying to me. He had never loved me the way a husband should love a wife. I dropped the phone onto the couch as if it had burned me. My hands were still trembling, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. I wanted to wake him up, to shove the phone in his face and demand answers. I wanted to scream, to make him feel even a fraction of the devastation ripping through my chest. But instead I just sat there staring at him and sleeping soundly, like nothing was wrong, like the life we had built wasn't a lie. And that's when the real horror of it hit me. Why? Why did he marry me? Why go through all of this, building a life together, exchanging vows, making promises he never intended to keep? Why let me believe I had a husband who loved me when all along I was nothing more than a cover for the life he was too afraid to live? Then, like a puzzle falling into place, I saw it, his family. I thought back to the way his mother would casually mention good Christian values, the way his father made snide remarks about men these days being too soft. I remembered how much pressure they put on him to find a wife, to settle down, to be the man they expected him to be. He was never allowed to be himself. So instead, he built a lie that had me at the center of it. I was his shield, His perfect, unsuspecting wife who made him look good at family gatherings, who silenced any questions about why he never seemed interested in dating before me. I was his excuse, his alibi, his carefully crafted mask, and I had walked into it so blindly, so willingly. I thought about our wedding day, the way his mother beamed with pride, the way his father clapped him on the back like he'd just won a prize. Finally, my son is a real man. Those words had meant nothing to me back then, just another outdated patriarchal comment from an old-fashioned father. But now, looking back, I saw it for what it was. They had been waiting for him to fix himself, and I was his solution. Had anything between us ever been real? Had he ever, even for a second, tried to love me the way I loved him? Or was I always just a convenient answer to an impossible problem? I thought about the way he had rushed our relationship, how quickly he had proposed. At the time, I thought it was romantic, a whirlwind love story. Now I realized I had just been checking off a box on his list of expectations. Wife, marriage, stability, respectability. It wasn't about love, it was about survival, and the worst part, he let me suffer for it. For years I had blamed myself for the distance between us. I'd wondered what I was doing wrong, why I never felt truly wanted by him. I had asked time and time again if something was wrong, if we needed to work on things. And every time he had reassured me with a tired smile, a kiss on the forehead, and the same empty words, "Everything's fine. I love you." Lies. He let me believe I was the problem. He let me question my own worth, my desirability, my ability to be a good wife, when the truth was I was never the issue. He was. I clenched my fists, a new emotion bubbling up inside me, something stronger than heartbreak. Anger. He wasn't just a liar. He was a coward, too afraid to stand up to his family, too afraid to be honest with me, too afraid to live his truth, so he forced me into a false reality instead. I looked at him again, still sleeping, so blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside me. I wanted to wake him up. I wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation. I wanted to see the panic in his eyes when he realized I knew, but I didn't, because I wasn't ready to hear his excuses. Instead, I sat there in the dark, my hands curled into fists, my breath shaky but controlled, because this wasn't just about him. This was about me, about the years I had wasted, about the love I had given to someone who could never love me back the same way. And now, I had to decide what I was going to do about it. I didn't sleep that night, or I couldn't. I sat in the dark, my mind racing, my body rigid with adrenaline, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the slow, agonizing realization that my marriage had never been real, that the man lying beside me, breathing evenly in his sleep, had been using me for years. The worst part? He looked peaceful, like he hadn't just shattered everything I believed in, like he wasn't lying to me, to himself, to everyone who thought they knew him. I wanted to wake him up. I wanted to shake him, shove his phone in his face, scream at him until he had no choice but to admit the truth. But I didn't, because deep down I knew what would happen. He would lie. Again. He would try to twist the truth, manipulate the situation, make it seem like I was overreacting, like I was the one at fault for invading his privacy. And worst of all, he would act like he still loved me, like he cared. I needed a plan. I needed to control the narrative before he had the chance to. By the time the sun rose, my body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than ever. I had scrolled through every text, every piece of evidence. I had memorized names, dates, messages. I knew the depth of this lie, and I knew exactly who he was lying to the most. His family. I watched him stir, stretching as he blinked up at me with a sleepy smile. "Morning, babe," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, completely unaware that this was the last morning we would ever share as husband and wife. I forced a smile. "Morning." I watched him sit up, rub his eyes, glance at his phone, and just like that, the first flicker of guilt passed over his face. He didn't know yet, but something inside him must have sensed it. Something must have told him that today everything was going to change. "You okay?" he asked, frowning slightly. I nodded, standing up. "Yeah, just tired." A lie, but no worse than the thousands he had told me. I moved through the morning routine like I always did. Coffee, emails, small talk. I pretended to be normal, knowing that the moment I walked out that door, normal would no longer exist. I needed time to think. I needed space. And I needed to make sure I wasn't just another pawn in his little game. By noon, I was sitting in my car outside his parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I had never been the kind of person to go behind someone's back, but then again, I had never been married to a man who was lying about his entire identity. I took a deep breath, then stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. His mother opened it with a warm smile, pulling me into a hug before I could even say hello. "Sweetheart, what a surprise!" I swallowed hard. She was beaming, genuinely happy to see me, and for a brief second guilt twisted in my stomach. But then I remembered. I remembered the texts, the deception, the fact that she had spent years thinking her son had built a perfect traditional life while he was secretly living a different one behind closed doors. "Can we talk?" I asked, stepping inside. She led me to the kitchen where she poured me a cup of tea like she always did. She had no idea she was about to hear the truth she had spent years ignoring. "I need to ask you something," I said, setting my cup down. "Did he ever seem different to you before we got married?" She frowned, tilting her head. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Did he ever seem hesitant? Like he wasn't sure about marrying me?" She exhaled softly, sitting down across from me. "I won't lie to you, he was always private about relationships. We used to worry that he wasn't interested in settling down. But then he met you, and everything changed. He finally seemed ready." My stomach twisted. Of course, he had seemed ready, because I wasn't a wife. I was his shield. "And what if," I continued, my voice quieter now, "that wasn't the full story?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something passing through them. "I don't understand." I pulled out my phone, hesitated for just a second, and then slid it across the table to her. "Read these." She picked it up, scrolling through the messages. I watched her face shift. Confusion, then disbelief, then something else. Something deeper. Her breath hitched as she set the phone down. This isn't possible," she whispered. "It is," I said coldly. "And I think deep down you already knew." Her face hardened. "Number, my son isn't like that. He would never—" "He did." I cut her off, my voice firm. "And he didn't just lie to me. He lied to you, to your whole family. He let you believe he was something he's not because he was too scared to tell you the truth." She shook her head fiercely. This doesn't make sense. He was always such a good boy. He had a good life with you. Maybe he was just confused. Maybe you misunderstood." I stared at her, stunned. "You think I did this? You think I made him gay?" "I don't know what you did," she snapped, standing up. "But my son would never betray his vows. Whatever this is, it's on you. Maybe you weren't a good enough wife. Maybe you pushed him away. But don't you dare try to blame him for this." I felt my hands curl into fists. "You're delusional. He's been living a lie his whole life because of you, because you made him think he had to. You forced him into this marriage. You forced him to lie to me, to himself, to everyone. And now you want to pretend this isn't happening? Fine. But it is, and you can't ignore it forever." She glared at me, her hands shaking as she clutched the phone. "Get out." I smiled coldly. Gladly. And just like that, I walked away. I drove home in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow, my entire body vibrating with adrenaline. I should have felt satisfied. I had done what I came to do. I had told her the truth, ripped off the mask her son had been wearing for years. And yet, her reaction had left a bitter taste in my mouth. "Number, you're misunderstanding. My son isn't that way. He was fine before, happy. And now you're coming here trying to destroy our family." Those words echoed in my head over and over, a constant loop of denial and blame. She hadn't even hesitated. She hadn't even considered the possibility that her son had spent his entire life suffocating under the weight of her expectations. Number, in her mind, I was the problem. Maybe you weren't a good enough wife. Maybe you pushed him away. It was laughable. I had spent years trying to be a good wife, supporting him, loving him, fighting for a marriage that had never even existed in the first place. And now I was the one to blame? But I wasn't done yet. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, my pulse pounding as I made my way to the front door. The second I walked inside, I knew something was off. The house was too quiet, too still, and then I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. His face was hardened, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowed at me like I was the one who had betrayed him. "Where the hell were you?" His tone wasn't worried. It was accusatory. I dropped my keys onto the table, tilting my head slightly. "Out." "Out where?" "Why? You keeping tabs on me now?" I let out a sharp laugh, mocking him. "That's funny, considering how long you've been sneaking around behind my back." His fingers curled around his phone, his grip tightening. His nostrils flared slightly, but his expression remained cold. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" "Oh, you don't know." I stepped forward, my voice dangerously calm. "Let me spell it out for you. First saw. Everything. I know about him. I know about all the nights you spent lying next to me pretending, and I know about the life you really wanted." His lips parted slightly, and for the briefest second I saw a flicker of panic, but then just like that it was gone, replaced with something uglier. "And what, you think you're some kind of victim?" His voice was sharp, condescending. I blinked. "Excuse me." "Oh, please," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You act like I was so terrible to you, like I abused you or something. Grow up. Marriages don't always work out." I felt my hands curl into fists. "You think this is about a failed marriage?" My voice was low, dangerous. "This isn't about us drifting apart. This isn't about a rough patch. This is about you using me, lying to me, wasting years of my life to keep up your perfect little image while you ran around behind my back." "Oh, get over yourself," he snapped. "Like you were some innocent angel in this marriage. Maybe if you weren't so damn controlling, I wouldn't have had to keep things from you." My breath caught in my throat. "Controlling?" I repeated, my voice a whisper. He smirked, shrugging lazily. "You always needed everything to be so perfect all the time. The perfect husband, the perfect life. Maybe if you weren't so desperate for some fairy tale, you would have realized I was never into you like that." That was the moment the last of my restraint snapped. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent his smirk faltering for just a second. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and pressed send. His phone dinged. I watched his smug expression vanish as he looked down. What did you do?" His voice dropped, a rare hint of real fear seeping into his tone. "Oh, nothing much," I said, smiling cruelly. "Just sent some of those sweet little texts to your father." His face went white. "No." He shook his head in disbelief. "You wouldn't—" "I did it because, for once, the truth deserves to be known. I spent years living in a lie. Now it's your turn to face reality." His hands shook as he scrolled that through his phone. His breathing turned shallow, his entire body rigid with panic. "You don't get it," he whispered. "No, you don't get it," I shot back. "You could have just left me. You could have just been honest. But instead you trapped me in your lie, let me waste years thinking I wasn't enough, all because you were too much of a coward to stand up to your damn family." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked truly lost for the first time in his life. "Please," he whispered, looking up at me. "You don't understand. He will never forgive me. He'll—" "That's not my problem," I interrupted coldly. "You didn't care about my life being destroyed, so why should I care about yours?" I watched him crumble, but I didn't feel a damn thing. No sympathy, no guilt, just satisfaction. Finally, I reached for my wedding ring, twisting it off my finger. I held it in my palm for a long moment before dropping it onto the coffee table between us. Game over. His eyes flickered to the ring, then back up to me, pure desperation on his face. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I messed up, but we can talk about this. We can—" "No," I cut him off. "You spent years pretending to be someone you're not. Now, you get to live with the truth. I just won't be here to watch." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out the door. And I never looked back. I didn't cry when I left. Not when I walked out the door. Not when I got into my car. Not even when I drove away, leaving behind the house that had once felt like a home, but now felt like nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. I thought I might break down when I was alone, when the weight of everything finally settled in. But the tears never came, because he lost me. He lost himself. And now he gets to spend the rest of his life wondering if it was all worth it. It wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of his control over me. The end of the gaslighting, the half-truths, the cold distance I had spent so long trying to fix without ever realizing I was never the problem. He was. And now he had to live with that. I moved into an apartment a few weeks later. Small, but mine. It was strange at first. Waking up alone, eating dinner without the sound of his voice in the background, not having to walk on eggshells around his moods. But every day, it got a little easier. Meanwhile, his life fell apart. His mother refused to accept the truth. His father was furious. The carefully crafted image he had spent years protecting had finally shattered, and there was nothing left for him to hide behind. One day, months later, I got a message from him. Just one line. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't give me back the years I lost. Sorry didn't erase the nights I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. And so, I let it go. I let him go. The truth always comes out, no matter how deeply it's buried. Living a lie doesn't just destroy you, it takes down everyone around you.